Hey my glam girls, welcome back to my channel. It's Chelsea, where we talk about all things glam and all things girly. I'm a beauty enthusiast and consultant who loves to talk about everything dealing with beauty and makeup, and today we are talking about the new Anastasia palette, and I'm really excited to share with you my thoughts about this palette because you all really requested this one. I'll be honest, I wasn't really too sure if I was gonna pick it up, but you all definitely convinced me. So I will be doing 2 eye looks, sharing with you my thoughts and my recommendations, and just a couple of other palettes that make me think of this one. And of course, let you know if I feel this is worth your buy. Thank you so much for spending some time with me today. I truly do appreciate it. And I would love for you to click that subscribe button, join the Glam Girl Squad. And if you enjoyed this video, give it a thumbs up and let's get right into this video. So this is Anastasia's newest palette. I think you pronounce it Nouveau. So sorry if I pronounced it incorrectly. I'm sure you all will correct me in the comment section. And you guys know I don't really delve too deep into packaging, but this is very different packaging. I don't even know how I would describe this material, but it's definitely more of a structured cardboard, and I really do like it. I like this green color. I love the green and gold contrast, and then on the inside we get the actual shadows here. I do notice that this is the first palette that doesn't come with a double-ended brush. Most of their palettes always do come with a brush, but this one does not. And the pans of this palette are larger. So if we're taking, for instance, the Jackie Aina palette, still my absolute favorite ABH palette out there. Here's the space where the brush would go, and you'll notice that the pans are significantly bigger in this new Nouveau palette compared to their traditional standard palettes. This palette does retail for $55, and we get a total amount of 1.34 grams of product, or 0.047 ounces per pan. Whereas in the standard traditional pan size, we would get 0.7 grams of product, or 0.02 ounces per pan. So ABH says this is an all-in-one palette for immediate, effortless looks from on the go to ultra glam. She says that this palette has reinvented mattes and multi-dimensional metallics, leaving everything to your imagination with amped up neutrals, perfect pops of color, and a fresh green story that feels ethereal. There are 3 shades, Wisteria, Paloma, and Metro, that are not for use near the eyes. And so those 3 shades are going to be Wisteria, Paloma, and Metro. Those 3 shades I'm going to assume are going to be pressed pigment shades that are not going to be safest near the eye area. Getting into some swatches of this palette, we have the first shade called Wings. This is described as metallic silver green with sparkling reflect. Isle, this is a metallic blonde gold. Belle, metallic antique bronze. Wisteria, matte pastel lavender with sparkling reflex. Lily, metallic rose gold with multi-dimensional reflex. Hope, metallic olive green with gold reflex. Paloma, matte creamy ivory with sparkling reflex. Fleur, matte golden peach. Liberty, matte muted hunter green. Peacock, duochrome bluish green with pink reflex. Metro, matte rich clay. And then lastly, Muse is metallic dark chocolate brown. So these are all of the shades swatched and that are in this palette. And you guys, this palette is beautiful. I really love this color story. And I'll admit, when I first saw this palette, I was like, this definitely looks more of like a fall-based palette. It didn't scream like summer times with like those bright and vibrant colors, but I really do enjoy, if I could say, this different tone of color, especially for this time of the year. And I think if anything, they definitely came out with something different for this time of year. So getting into the 2 eye looks, the first eye look I did film on a different day, and I'm gonna be honest, I don't even remember the order that I went in. So follow me on the other half of this screen for the exact order. But I will say, I do remember using The shades Metro, Muse, Hope, Lily, and Isle. And all of these shades in this palette just blend so beautifully. The mattes are really easy to blend and work with. I remember using Metro for the previous look. I had no issues with that matte. It blended really nicely. I didn't have it near my eyes, or my eyeballs, I should say. So I didn't experience any irritation with that shade. And these metallic shimmers, you know, this is what I'll say. If ABH can't do anything, they can make some eyeshadow. I think they have some of the best formulated and pigmented eyeshadows. With the metallic shades, you do have some fallout, but honestly, it's nothing that's like a mess under the eyes. So for the first eye look, I didn't have foundation on, but for this particular eye look, the one I'm wearing now, I actually did apply my foundation first, and I had no cleanup that was needed under the eye area. So yes, they're metallic. Yes, you do have kick up in the pan when you're using them, but if you press the eyeshadow on your eyes in a tapping motion, then I experienced very little to no fallout with these shades. So for the first eye look, I loved how it came together. This shade Lily is stunning. Lily might be my most favorite shade in this palette. I absolutely loved it. For this eye look, because I just did this one, so I do remember what I used for this one. I first went in with the shade called Peacock, which is just a beautiful multi-chromed type of shade. I love shades like this. And then after that, I went in with the shade called Belle. Belle, in my opinion, is going to be one of the most prettiest one and done eyeshadows in this palette for more medium to tan complexions. After that, I went in with Wings for the inner portion of the eye. And at first I was like, is this too cool toned for these two shades that I've been working with? But I actually love the transition and the combination of using cooler toned eyeshadows with this warmer tone kind of in the middle. It makes for such a beautiful, kind of grungy, but still not too grungy type of look on the eyes. Chef's kiss, okay? Then I wanted to go in with this beautiful matte kind of olive type green color, and I wanted to really kind of concentrate this color in the crease. And the reason why is because when I first started this eye look, I went in with a fluffy blending brush, went in with Liberty, and tried to blend it into my transition area and my crease. And for my complexion, the width of my eye space, it became way too muddy, way too fast. So for me, I went in with a very pencil-like brush, and I'll show you. Okay, here we go. So I went in with the What's Up Beauty. This is the R101 brush, and as you can see, it's a very tight pencil brush. I went in and concentrated the matte olive green shade directly into my crease, and then I went in with a blending brush to blend it out, and I really, really like how this looks on my eye. It doesn't look muddy at all. It doesn't just cloud the eye look, and it's beautiful and stunning. I also used this shade Liberty on the lower lash line, went also with Peacock for the inner portion of the lower lash line, and then for the inner corner highlight, went back in with Wings. And then to blend out the matte shade Liberty a little more, I lightly tapped my brush into the shade Floor and just blended out the lower lash line and also in the transition area. And you guys, I am totally satisfied and just completely happy with both of the eye looks that I created with this palette. The only two shades that I didn't use in the tutorials is gonna be the shade Wisteria and then this shade called Paloma. Wisteria I did put against my skin and it doesn't look ashy, it doesn't clash, it's not too much. If you have the Natasha Denona Pastel palette and you look at, is it this shade? Yeah, this shade right here. If you can use this shade in this palette, then you can most definitely use Wisteria. So just holding them up, you can see that Wisteria, trying to get the glare right. Wisteria and this shade here are, if I could say, wisteria is going to be deeper than this shade here. So if this shade in the Natasha palette works against your skin tone, it's not too ashy, then this shade will work beautifully against your skin tone as well. And I'm also glad that the tones in this palette, although some of them are neutral, they are not ashy, not too cool toned, to where I do think that this palette can work for a good amount of complexions. Now getting into like complexion range, who this palette can work for, I honestly feel like this palette could work for a really nice range of complexions. So we have this shade called Muse right here, and granted it is a metallic shade, but in the first eye look, I did use it in areas on the eye that I typically like to use matte shades, and I really enjoyed it and was really comfortable with it. But if you have a deep, rich, dark complexion and you don't like to use metallic shades or shimmer shades for your deepening types of shades on the eyes, then you will need to step out of this palette and reach for a matte shade elsewhere, because you're not going to find it in this palette. And as a matter of fact, in terms of like depth shades, deepening shades, the only one in this palette that I could even use for me would be, in terms of matte shades, would be Liberty. So in terms of matte shades, no, this is not going to be an all-in-one type of palette. For the most of us, we're gonna have to reach outside of this palette to get a matte brown, matte tan, anything like that. If you're trying to use this palette just all in one, you can. Your eye looks just are going to be a little limited, because there are not a lot of matte shades in this palette to begin with, and then on top of that, you're not going to have a matte depth shade. But like I said, I have used this shade on the outer area of the eye. I've smoked it on the lower lash line, and I really do enjoy it that way, and it's not too much, not too sparkly and glittery for my liking, because I prefer to use matte shades for that. So I can and will use a matte shade for that. The pops of shimmer and the tones that they've chosen, I think can work for any complexion. And so for the most part, I would say this palette, for the most part, can work for a pretty wide range of complexions. I know a lot of you all were like, I wonder if this palette is going to be deep enough to show up on tan deep complexions, and I do think it is. It's just not going to be an all-in-one palette for deep rich complexions. And in all honesty, it may not be an all-in-one palette for even lighter complexions, because once again, if you want a matte brown, you're not going to find it in this palette if you don't want, you know, to use either of these two matte shades to add depth. So it's not going to be an all-in-one palette really for everybody, depending on the look that you're trying to go for. But can you use this palette by itself to create a look? Yes, you can. It just depends on the look that you want to get. But for me, I felt like every shade showed up beautifully against my complexion. There wasn't one shade that I used that I was just like, yeah, this really just is a dud for me. If I wanted to, I could have even put this shade as like a brow bone highlight, because if I do a brow bone highlight, I usually like a matte cream shade. So this shade right here is one of my go-to shades when I do want a brow bone highlight. So I'm really happy with this palette. I do think if you have a deeper complexion and you're interested in this palette, I do think you can definitely get some really good use out of it, just with the understanding of, depending on the matte shades that you want to use, you're gonna have to reach for another palette for that. Now, I immediately thought of Sydney Grace and Mel Thompson's Tiny Marvels palette. I just was like, there are way too many colors in Mel's palette that remind me of shades in this ABH palette. And when I held them up against each other, I was like, wow, they are quite similar. So let me get in here like that. So Mel's palette's on top, ABH's is on the bottom, and you can see there are definitely some shades that are quite similar. The story of the palettes are the same. Both of these color stories are very earthy. I would say that they're both very ethereal, kind of whimsical, And I think, because one of you all made this comment and was like, review it because I don't want to feel like I need it. Show me comparisons so I don't have to buy it. And I'm going to say, if you want this palette, I don't think you're going to be disappointed. I'm just going to say that I really enjoy this one. I'm actually really glad I picked it up. But if you have Tiny Marvels, you really don't need ABHs at all. Unless you just love the formulation of this palette, you're a fan of the brand, and you just, you know, love to support the brand. These two palettes, I would dare to say, are very, very similar. Now, formulations, you know, are going to be a little different. And of course, like, we get more product in this palette. But color story and some of the formulations are going to be quite similar. I'm not gonna do swatches of the whole palette, but like, let's swatch Wisteria and Jewel Bee from Mel's. So we have Jewel Bee from Tiny Marvels and then Wisteria from ABH. So you can see that Wisteria's is going to be a little cooler, not as warm as Jewel Bee from Tiny Marvels, but they're both lavender shades and they're similar. They are similar. I have to swatch Scarab and Peacock, because those two shades were the first two shades that I thought of. Like, when I saw Peacock in Nouveau, I was like, that looks like Scarab from Tiny Marvels. So we have Scarab from Tiny Marvels, and then Peacock from the Nouveau palette. And you guys, these two are so similar, so similar. Texture-wise, we see differences in texture. Let me blend out that shade a little bit more. Texture-wise, I do see a difference in texture a little bit, and the shades are not identical, but they are very, very similar. Like, if I put them on the eyes for an eye look, you probably wouldn't be able to tell a difference between the two. So I think that they are very similar. Now, here is where, if you're going for like, which palette should I choose? I think Mel's palette is still available on Sydney Grace. I'll leave a little comment if it is or is not. But where the Sydney Grace and Mel's palette kind of win over the ABH is that we've got this chocolatey matte brown here that is absolutely stunning. We have other tan-based matte shades that, if you want to really diversify your eye look, you really can do that because of the matte shades that you have here. Because depending on the matte that you want to go for, you can mix these two shades together to get like a lighter tone if you didn't want to go as rich as this one. And I would say, just all in all, the tones in this palette are a little deeper. So if you have a richer, deeper complexion and you wanted a palette with like a whimsical color story like this, but you needed richness to it, this palette is definitely going to be the one for you, compared to this palette here that's not going to give you as much diversity in terms of the matte shades. And even, if I could say, the richness in, or the depth in color between Nouveau and Tiny Marvels. So I highly recommend both of these palettes. I think they're both beautiful and stunning. But just in terms of comparisons, I was like, Tiny Marvels, very, very similar color story, just richer and of course deeper matte shades. The other palette that I thought of was the Jackie Aina palette, which, like I said, is my favorite ABH palette. I really wish they would bring this one back, because this one just was not loved on enough. And the people who have this palette know the amazingness of this palette. And these two palettes, once I held them up together, I was like, okay, they're definitely two different color stories. There's only one shade in the Jackie Aina palette that is similar to this one. So we have this shade in the Jackie Aina palette that reminds me of, oh, can't get myself together, Wings in this one. But other than that, the color stories are definitely going to be quite different. But I think it was just those couple of shades that made me go like, Jackie Aina, maybe? No, but there's a couple of shades in here. Once again though, this palette's gonna give you more depth It's gonna give you more richness. So if you had a deeper complexion, the color stories are not the same, but like this palette will give you more of the depth and the richness, especially in the matte shades compared to NOUVEAU. So those were the only two palettes that I had that I felt were even somewhat similar to this palette, this color story here. But highly recommend this one. I think this is another winner for the brand. Absolutely another winner. Highly recommend it. So let me know your thoughts down below. I want to hear all the things. Let me know if you're interested in this palette, and if you do have it, have you been enjoying it? Do you recommend it? Leave all that goodness in the comment section below. And if you've made it to this point in the video and you have yet to subscribe to my channel, I would love for you to consider subscribing and joining the Glam Girl Squad. And guys, that is it. Thank you so much for watching, and I really hope to see you in my very next video. Bye guys.